Hey, welcome back to the Black Pill. We're talking about ways of knowing. We're breaking ways of knowing. So, the next thing we're going to get into is authority. How can you know stuff? Well, people tell me, or I read it in a book. Okay. People tell you. People tell you. Which people? So, there's one version of the argument that's really just about popularity. A lot of people believe a thing, and therefore we have cause to believe that thing is true. Now, is the majority right most of the time? We've created a special set of circumstances. We created and broke a special set of circumstances where the majority of Americans could be trusted on the majority of issues the majority of the time. We did that through education, through being very careful about providing real facts to people, educating them, training them on critical thinking, and then trusting them to make decisions. Lately, we've broken that. Facebook and Twitter and the people who have optimized those things for destructive purposes have really broken that. Now, can you say the majority is right? Can you say the majority is always right? Can you say the majority is usually right? And remember that concept of reliability. So the majority might be right some of the time, but how do you know which time they are right and when they should be trusted? Right? So I had a political science professor back in 1997 who liked to say, are two heads better than one? Well, what if the two heads are Beavis and Butthead? Obviously, you wouldn't trust Beavis and Butthead. So we have to just let that one go right away, right? Popularity is a way of knowing. A lot of people believe a thing. Well, a lot of people believed that slavery was a good idea. And they were right about that economically, and they were wrong about that morally. They were wrong about it morally. So, yeah, so here we are. We just have to let that go. I really want to dwell on the authoritarian version of the argument, which is somebody that you trust to know things tells you, right? Like, for example, teachers. Uh, we can obviously do away with politicians because politicians are speaking from a point of interest, right? Because Barack Obama says it, is it necessarily true? No. I would tend to give someone like Barack Obama more credit for truthfulness than someone like Donald Trump or even George W. Bush. But he can still be wrong about things without intentionally lying. But then you get to the Trump camp and all of the people who've come after following in his mold. And again, the purpose is to destroy information so we cannot make good collective decisions. The point is to lie all the time. The lying is the point. So obviously, you wouldn't believe somebody like Donald Trump or any of your local representatives on the Republican side, and on the Democratic side, very carefully, very carefully. What about teachers? Have your teachers never lied to you? Just spend like 16 seconds in your head thinking about kiddie school and the kinds of things you learned there. Were those things true? You can probably think of a number of falsehoods. One I get in class fairly often is your math teacher told you that you wouldn't always have a calculator on your person. You needed to learn to do calculations by hand because you wouldn't always have a calculator. And that just is false, right? Even if you don't directly have a calculator, you have Google, and Google can fix most of your math problems for you. So there's that one. Ridiculous stories about the first Thanksgiving, those weren't true. And very popularly, the Columbus story. So we've really changed our understanding of Christopher Columbus from a sort of ahistorical, heroic figure narrative to in modernity, very politicized and sort of on the left. He's a cultural demon. He's a destroyer, full of bad intention, and kind of on the right, he's still this heroic guy and like taking down statues as some kind of just woke historical rewriting. But in the middle, there's a lot of nuance. And he didn't start slavery, but he certainly participated in it. And he didn't intentionally commit genocide, but he did wipe out populations bringing his diseases. The advent of Columbus into the so-called New World was not a good thing for indigenous people. But what you learned in kiddie school probably comes straight from Washington Irving. So I'm going to link some more stuff for you. The comedians are actually really good on this. I'm going to link you Greg Proops, if I remember, on stodgy settlers, the so-called pilgrims. I'm going to link you Robert Wool, who's really, really very entertaining on history and worth at least a bit of a listen. His special was called "Assume the Position." That was pretty good. So I'll link you those just for entertainment value. But I'm really drawing myself off of Lowen, James Lowen, and the book is "Lies My Teacher Told Me." Right. So Washington Irving writes this sort of epic narrative of Columbus, and it's made up. It's heavily fictionalized. It makes him a lot of money, but that becomes sort of the pop culture understanding of the Columbus story. And then in the 50s and when they're writing Bugs Bunny cartoons, there's a Bugs Bunny special, and everyone sees that at the movie theater. Well, you don't go to the theater strictly to watch Bugs Bunny, but it's a feature that goes ahead of your feature while people are finding their seats and getting their popcorn. And so everybody sees this thing, including people who are going to teach school the next day. And so we get this broad cultural understanding of Columbus that comes from this entirely ahistorical fictional source, which is Washington Irving. Very little about the version of Columbus you just heard about, unless you're a history student and studied him specifically. Very little about that has any basis whatsoever in reality. So extreme care about talking Columbus. Go get a real education before taking on the cultural myths and legacy of Christopher Columbus. Who else? The Mayflower. The Mayflower. So the Mayflower as the foundational event of what would become the United States of America. First of all, those were not pilgrims seeking religious freedom. That's not who they were at all. They were some kind of Anabaptist, and after hundreds of years of religious civil war in England, they were petitioning the king to sort of apply their brand of religious intolerance on other people. They wanted the ability to punish other people for not doing religion their way, and the king is like, no. Not only no, but GTFO, and he sort of boots them to where, Holland or something. So they're exiled effectively. They raise a bunch of money in exile, build a boat, and sail to the New World, where they're going to start a new future, not of religious freedom, but of religious intolerance, right? In the news just this week, we have Michael Flynn talking about this is one nation under God, and that God must be the Christian God. And so if those people win power, they're not talking about freedom of religion. They're talking about a theocratic state where you're Christian and you say Merry Christmas, or presumably the government has a right to punish you. And that is exactly what those first pilgrims, settlers, wanted. In fact, they started doing theocracy on the boat on the way over. Like, the majority of people on that ship were not pilgrims. And they made them do their prayers and their services and limit their language and so on. It's a minoritarian theocracy. Well, the other problem with that story you learned in kiddie school is that's not how America was founded. There were a ton of people coming over from Europe because there were super limited resources. All of the trees had been cut down and all of the tin had been mined. Natural resources were on the wane and population was exploding. There wasn't land for new farmers to farm. So the Americas were seen as this great big trove, a treasure trove of natural resources, and people came over to mine those resources. to grow tobacco for sale, to get gold and silver and sometimes human slaves and trees and wood for lumber. That is how America was founded. The Dutch port that's now New York City, and Spanish farmers in Florida, and the French in the swamps of Louisiana. God only knows what they were looking for in the swamp, but that was one founding. Spanish has been spoken inside the borders of what we now call the United States since the first waves of settlers arrived here. Hundreds of years of Spanish being spoken here. It's just a result of war that English is our national language. As George Lopez likes to say, we didn't cross the border crossed us. Meaning that there were people who previously identified as Spanish and previously identified as Mexican who lived within these borders, and they lived within the previous set of borders, right? So that's always happened. So just because you learned a thing in school, does that mean it's true? If you ask a high school teacher and you ask them just the right way, they'll tell you their job is to correct the lies that you learned in elementary and middle school. If you ask a college professor, we'll tell you our job is to correct the lies you learned in high school. Yeah. And I've taught graduate psychology at times, and I found I spent a lot of time correcting the lies people had learned in undergraduate psychology. Yeah, it's a super tough gig. So just because somebody tells you a thing and you trust them, should you necessarily believe it? Just because I tell you stuff, should you believe it? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Check. And the more the thing they're saying is out of consensus, I guess the more you check. But sometimes because of popularity, we for sure have consensus around some things that are false. They're just false. Yeah. Okay. Remember, what we're after is certainty. That is, because you know a thing in a particular way, you have certainty that it's true. Not the feeling of certainty, the epistemological state. Because we learned it this way, we can gamble everything on it, right? And that's just not the case with authority. So a special case of authority is books, right? So one of my sort of former friends liked to argue with me, and she would say things that they come from a certain political reality. And I'd argue from a factual basis, and she'd say, Jason, you're abusing me with your education, right? You're presuming I don't know anything because you have a doctorate and I don't, but I read books. Right? And she goes to the library and she reads a book a week at the library, and that's good. You should do that. Go to the library, read the books, expand your brain, think about stuff. Here's the thing. Those books, are they curated? Right? Are they from a curated collection? Has a subject matter expert gone through and picked out the best available books on a given topic? Are they peer reviewed? Because if they're not peer reviewed and they're not curated, then the chances are you're starting books, and if they appeal to your particular set of bias, you finish them. And if they contradict your set of bias, you ignore them or finish them on autopilot and they make no impression on you. Right? This is called confirmation bias, where you're only really reading things that confirm your biases, your preconceptions, what you want to believe. And to really try to know stuff, you have to do a good faith review of the best available evidence, which means peer-reviewed and curated. Sometimes, even if you're reading science, sometimes you're reading science in a book exactly because it's outside of consensus. Um, did a comet or an asteroid wipe out the dinosaurs? There was a brief period between like 95 and 2005 where we thought that had happened. Um, there was a scientist who studied this stuff, discovers the iridium layer, in the fossil record, and goes, that could only have happened from a comet, and that's right. And there's the crater. Where is that at? Like Tenochtitlan or something, giant impact crater, and it matches the timeline. And the trouble is that dinosaurs, the fossil record is starting to show a decline in dinosaurs in the fossil record leading up to that event, and a continuation of the dinosaurs in the fossil record following that event. And so the comet, the asteroid, whatever, did not wipe out the dinosaurs. It was probably a contributing factor. Um, it was really hard to get anything about that KT boundary, is that what it's called, actually published in the science. And so a way you can do an end run on that is find a publisher willing to like publish something a little bit controversial, and you can make a bunch of money on it. You could maybe get a bestseller, but also you could make it so that at every paleontological conference, people have read your popular book if you've been successful at that. And the question is, hey, but what about the idea that a comet impact, an asteroid wiped out the dinosaurs? And then some, speaker not prepared on the subject has to hem and haw and try to explain what the science is on that at the moment. So you can do an end run, get your stuff published without going through the peer review that keeps rejecting you. You can also influence what is publishable by doing that. And the guy turns out to be like mostly right, and it's fine. It's fine. Honestly, it's fine. So that's books, right? That's books. Are you reading stuff that's peer reviewed and you're in consensus? Um, yeah. The thing is, you probably read a lot of books that are not consensus, and you probably read them in school. Yeah, in the late 90s, early 2000s, there's this new kind of conservative movement. They do a lot of grassrootsy stuff, like state government had been kind of a laughing stock for a generation, and they ran in all of the state elections and got elected because no one else was really voting in those. And then gerrymandered the states so that only Republicans could ever win in those states again. And as part of that, they ran for all of the school boards, which were also neglected. And so places like East Texas, um, zones here where I live even, the school boards are super right-wing conservative Christian biblical literalists, right? And these are the folks where they're always sneaking in stuff about intelligent design into the curricula, and always, yeah, never mind. Because those boards do the textbook adoptions for schools, it really behooves the big textbook manufacturers to cater to those states. Like Texas is a huge state population-wise. And if you can't get approved in Texas, there's probably no point publishing your textbook. Well, they want a particular version of history, right? That's super evident right now with the right wing kind of drumming up a moral panic about um, critical race theory, which is this sort of narrow 70s proto-revolutionary idea that American law gets applied unequally to people of color because it was designed to, and it was designed to, beginning with the Constitution, where they had to, on the one hand, they're saying all men are created equal, and on the other hand, they have to make accommodations for these slave states that will allow slavery to continue in a free country, right? So from the very beginning, there have been laws that pertain to slaves, and those laws haven't always been completely scrubbed from the books, and we have all of the consequences of that in modernity. But that's legal theory, and you teach it to probably third year judicial doctorate students, lawyers. And it's not a thing. It's not a thing. Now, it has sort of trickled down, and our understandings of history have changed, and we teach a more egalitarian version of history, a more truthful version of history that isn't just all about white male heroes. And that's the stuff that the conservatives don't want you to see. But the fact remains that you probably went to a school where when we got to the Civil War, we sort of skipped over most of it. And the word slavery was never uttered in that classroom. It's not in the book. Instead, they might use euphemisms like uncompensated labor, gross, or they might never mention it at all, right? So at the college level, when the topic comes up, if I mention American slavery, there's like 3 or 4 people in the class who are like, what are you talking about? Slavery in the Civil War? What are you talking about? It was a states' rights issue. Yes, Derek, it was a states' rights issue. But which right in particular, right? One right in particular here. It was an economic issue. Yeah. It absolutely was an economic issue, because when you're buying human beings and using them as forced labor as your economic model, then we say you can't do that anymore. Whatever you do next is going to be a lot more expensive. It absolutely is an economic issue, and slavery is the economic issue here. Okay, so you probably don't have an advanced degree, and you probably slept through most of your high school classes, let's be honest, right? If you've come to college and gotten some of the correctives, they're competing with the neural networks that you already made in baby school and middle school and high school. It's very hard to shift your perspective on the world right after that. It can be done, but it's very difficult. So should we trust authority? Should we trust people because we believe them and they've proven trustworthy on other issues? Should we just believe whatever they say? Well, we should believe scientific consensus, right? If you want me to believe in Bigfoot, I'll believe in Bigfoot if you provide a corpse and a team of independent biologists who have access to the corpse, who publish articles with their findings that this is a previously unknown anthropoid ape in North America, and they get scientific consensus on that. That's what I'll believe. But one person writes a book about Bigfoot. No, I'm out on that. It's too far from consensus. And that's it. Because look, man, anybody can write a book, right? You can write a book. I write books. I'm not pushing them here. I'm retired from that trade, but I write books, man. So that's it. Okay, bye.